Let's talk about Hunter Biden. This is one of the most perfect clips that we've ever seen. So MSNBC's Joe Scarborough has on Hunter Biden's lawyer, Abby Loyal, to flack for him. And Joe, I guess because he has to cave to the pressure now, is like, okay, so what was going on with all this foreign money flowing into Hunter's pockets? And the lawyer is very quick to defend his client's, his well-known skills, his well-known intellect as a businessman. Let's take a listen.
What did Hunter Biden think he was getting that $7 million for? Why would he be getting paid so much money?
All right, well, stop with your $7 million and talk about how many years that Hunter has been in business and what happened to each of those specific years. When you say it that way, people think that somebody just sent him a check for $7 million.
Well, the Washington Post reported it was $7 million. What's the $7 million over, and how many countries did it come from?
Well, okay, so first of all, it's much more complicated than to say it comes from countries. There are joint ventures between American entities and, in one or two occasions, a potential foreign entity to create the possibility of jobs and energy in the United States. That's too complicated to try to explain, but I can answer the question that you asked in the following way. Over the time that he was in business, this is, again, something that people ought to pay attention to. Hunter Biden went to Georgetown University, went to Yale Law School, was on the board of directors of a bank, was on the board of directors of Amtrak, is somebody who went and worked in an international law firm. People seem to forget that this is not the person who's simply out there having people write checks for no reason. He's a capable, educated, experienced person. Now, if Congress wants to start saying, wait, does he get opportunities because his last name is Biden? They should look to themselves. I mean, Senator Joe Manchin's wife is on a commission in West Virginia where Congress had provided an enormous amount of funds.
Well, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
He's not wrong, but there's also a lot of
that last part
other...
is kind of accurate.
It's not wrong. There's a lot of other corruption. Doesn't necessarily just... My personal favorite is that they basically refer to him as a job creator. You see, Hunter was creating a lot of jobs for hookers here in the U.S. and across, and drug dealers. You know, we got to think about this is outrageous. You know, all this, his qualifications that he listed were all ones that also came as a result of his corruption.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, he served on the board of Amtrak. You know why he served on the board of Amtrak? Because Biden was obsessed with Amtrak. His qualification was, quote, he rode the trains a lot.
That was the best.
Everyone thinks I'm kidding whenever I say that. It is an official statement that he made whenever he applied for the job. And it would all be funny if it wasn't one of the most brazen, like, elements of someone getting away with it clearly by becoming filthy rich, exploiting his position, and now, because his dad is the president, getting special treatment. And we're seeing that clear as day. Let's put this up there on the screen. This is a fascinating inside look where, in talks with prosecutors, while Hunter was negotiating his sweetheart deal with the current special counsel, he actually, lawyers made a threat, and I don't think there's any way to read it otherwise, that President Biden would now have to be a fact witness, Krystal, for the defense at trial. The Department of Justice argued that by threatening to put the president on the stand, his own father, he would start a constitutional crisis around whether, you know, the president can, about immunity. But it is clear that Hunter was actually weaponizing his role as the first son to basically blackmail and try to get the DOJ to give him that sweetheart pardon deal. There's also some more elements that we're beginning to learn about how exactly said sweetheart deal began to collapse. And it's becoming quite clear. If we can go ahead and put D3, please, up on the screen. This is an inside report from the New York Times, where they are talking about how Hunter Biden's legal team is now arguing, and with some apparently sympathetic ears in the Department of Justice, that the IRS whistleblowers should be prosecuted for coming forward. But if you put the two stories together, you actually learn something very interesting, which is that sweetheart deal actually collapsed after the whistleblowers came forward, because the public details of what Hunter has gotten away with effectively by originally being able to plead misdemeanor and get immunity from all future federal prosecution, it looked terrible for the current special counsel. And he was like, all right, I can't be agreeing to this deal. There's all kinds of chicanery now clearly going on behind the scenes.
Such a mess.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Such a mess.
Yeah.
And The story in Politico that breaks down how this all fell apart is really interesting. I mean, basically, the TLDR is that Weiss screwed this up in every way that he could. First of all, he appears to have been way too swayed by Hunter's lawyers and their, lengthy PowerPoint presentation and their long letters that they sent, threatening, hey, DOJ, Joe Biden's DOJ, you really want to force the president of the United States onto the stand as a fact witness here? Really? You want to do that? And then also they were making the argument that, this would be seen as political if you went after Hunter, et cetera, where it was actually political that they didn't go after Hunter is what ended up happening. So Weiss strikes this deal with Hunter that he really shouldn't have. That the most egregious, really in some ways, part of it was the broad immunity that they did agree to based on the letter that Politico got their hands on that had the specific language about exactly what legal issues would be taken off the table. I'll give you the specific language here. It's kind of technical, but just so you get a sense of it, they say the U.S. agrees not to criminally prosecute Hunter Biden outside of the terms of this agreement for any federal crimes encompassed by the attached statement of facts, and the statement of facts attached as Exhibit 1 to the memorandum of plea agreement filed the same day. This agreement does not provide any protection against prosecution for any future conduct by Biden or his affiliated business. And in those statements of facts that they reference there, they go through chapter and verse of not only the drug issues, the tax issues, the gun issues, but also the foreign, potentially corrupt dealings. Yeah. They also list that all out. So when Hunter and his team in the court were like, no, the agreement includes this broad immunity, they were actually correct based on the deal that had been signed off both by the government and by Hunter Biden. Now, to be clear, it is outrageous that Weiss gave him this broad immunity. I mean, that was a real screw up. And it appears that Weiss came to understand when these whistleblowers came forward, and once there was political heat and scrutiny, came to understand that he gave away the store and really shouldn't have. And so then they try to backtrack. Then you have the whole plea deal collapse in the courtroom. Now everything is really up in the air. Hunter's original lawyer, Jeffrey Clark, who negotiated this original plea deal that, again, both parties signed off on, he is now off of Hunter's team. Abby Lowell, who you saw there on MSNBC, is now leading the team, very well-known, high-powered DC lawyer, et cetera, because Clark may now be a witness in terms of the Hunter trial of how this deal all came together. Because Hunter's team is like, we had a deal, you signed off on it. I don't care if you changed your mind and thought it was too good of a deal, but we had this deal. And so part of the potential trial going forward is going to be litigating whether or not this deal represents like a binding contract. But just to get to the bottom line here, it was insane that Weiss ever gave him this widespread immunity for all that he was doing in terms of business deals overseas, even as they have an investigation continuing and ongoing. He never should have given that deal. And now he's trying to CYA to cover his own ass by, asking for the special counsel appointment and going back on his, the original deal, et cetera. But it's a total mess.
And guess what? On top of all this, as if it doesn't get any worse, put this up there. It turns out, as crazy as all of this sounds, it gets even crazier, because it turns out that Hunter Biden actually moved into the White House for 2 weeks, all while this crazy stuff was going down. As he was resolving his legal troubles, in June, moves into the White House, having multiple private conversations with the president. A plea agreement was actually made on June 20th. Quote, 1 day later, the president and first lady welcomed first House guests from California, his name, Hunter Biden, along with his wife and one of his young sons, to stay for 2 weeks immediately after that was done. This is, first of all, not disclosed. How can the president and the White House are like, hey, what do we have to disclose whenever our family is staying there? It's like, well, yeah, I guess if it's like your small child, that's one thing. If it's your 50-plus-year-old son who's currently negotiating with the Department of Justice and getting sweetheart deals where you're directly weaponizing your role as first son, I think that's another one. Also, it directly calls into question, and actually does bolster a little bit of Hunter's defense here, where how can you say, I've never spoken to my son about it, when he's literally living with you the day afterwards for 2 straight weeks while you are the current president and head of the United States government? If Trump did something like this, people would lose their minds. You can cry Jared Kushner and all that stuff all you want. It's all true. We know no one here is not going to validate it, but you cannot look at this state of facts and the pattern of everything that we have all just laid out and not say this is an outrageous scandal. And that the Biden family in particular, and especially President Biden in his role here, he clearly does not think he has done a single damn thing here wrong. He has no remorse. They're not even trying to dispel with the appearance of corruption. I just think that it's so outrageous to have him staying in privately in the White House quarters while all of this is going down. There's no attempt to even distance himself from any of this.
The part that I found most actually interesting in this reporting was about how most aides, almost everyone working the White House, they won't even talk to Joe about any of this. They have this report here. They say inside the White House, most aides strenuously avoid discussing Hunter's troubles with the president, believing their contributions and ideas would not be welcome, even as they worry about the personal toll it's taking on the elder Biden, according to half a dozen current and former officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity. Biden's tendency over the course of his long tenure in D.C. is to have the same very small circle of advisors, and those are the only people he really lets in. Now, in the beginning of this administration, apparently there was an attempt made to bring some of the newer folks into the circle. There were larger meetings that everyone was participating in. The anecdotal reports that I have heard is that that is becoming less and less frequent, and that he is now increasingly sort of confining himself to this long-time circle of, you know, guys who are his same basically age and generation that have been with him forever. And part of that, I think, does have to do with the fact that, look, the Hunter Biden, this is going to be a big deal in the presidential campaign. It's a big deal politically. It's a big deal in terms of reality and perception of corruption. These are issues that you would want all of your advisors to be able to speak with you about and weigh in on. But because there is such great sensitivity about it, basically no one will talk to him about it. He doesn't want to hear from anybody on it. And it has made his circle increasingly insular in terms of who he even lets in to talk about anything, not just Hunter, et cetera. So I think that is also a fascinating look inside the White House about how he's increasingly becoming more and more insular as these issues regarding Hunter take up more and more of his mind share.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's crazy that Biden, apparently, I mean, it just, look, he thinks he's an ornery man. He's like, my family is off limits. He thinks he can just set the rules as the president and people should listen to him. You know, someone should tell him that we actually live in a democracy, and that's not how it works. So, look, we'll continue to look into this, but man, I mean, this is some of the, for all the reporting that's out there, I think rightfully about January 6th and Mark Meadows and all this stuff, this is like a soap opera level of political drama, which is not getting its due.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.